The wind sliced through London's streets on that grey November morning. The red poppies of Remembrance Day barely clung to the soaked coats of veterans. Men who once defended the United Kingdom now walked hunched, forgotten, staring at a country that seemed to have turned its back on them. As the trumpets played, King Charles looked on in silence, and that silence said it all. Your sacrifice was not worth this. Meanwhile, inside a heated room in Downing Street, Keir Starmer kept his head down, feigning respect, while his government poured millions of pounds a day into luxury hotels for illegal immigrants, as veterans went hungry. The crowd watching the ceremony did not know it, but the king was about to say something that would change the country's recent history. Something many would call the greatest moral confrontation in modern Britain. Veterans must come first. Those 4 words, spoken by King Charles, echoed like thunder. But what came next was even more devastating. Starmer's face hardened. He knew what the people were thinking. How could a government spend $8 million a day on hotels for 32,000 migrants, while thousands of elderly people wait more than 12 hours on NHS trolleys? The country that once promised to care for its heroes now let them die in silence. The king did not name names, but everyone knew whom he meant. At that moment, the tension between the palace and Downing Street was almost palpable. The people watched, not understanding, but feeling. Something was about to explode. The silence between the king's speech and Starmer's gaze was worth more than 1,000 headlines. And, for the first time in years, the government's moral authority was being questioned in public. And so began what many would call the week of silence, a heavy, uncomfortable silence that spread from the streets of London to the corridors of Buckingham Palace. Because, for the first time, the king did not just give a speech, he accused. Without raising his voice, without naming names, he exposed what everyone knew but no one dared to say. Britain was betraying its own children. Meanwhile, the headlines tried to stifle the revolt. The BBC spoke of a misunderstanding. Progressive papers called the speech too emotional, but the people did not buy the narrative. Online, videos of weeping veterans went viral, with simple captions. He spoke for us. Each tear was a cruel reminder. The country that promised never to forget had forgotten its own heroes. And the numbers did not lie. Nearly 200,000 British pensioners admitted skipping meals to pay for heating last winter. Over 5,000 veterans slept on the streets, while the government spent $3.9 billion on hotels for illegal immigrants. And what did Starmer do about it? Nothing. Just meetings, reports, empty speeches. When the king spoke, it was as if the mask had slipped. Suddenly, the people saw the scale of the farce. The left's promises, progress, inclusion, all crumbled before a simple truth. A government that does not honor its dead does not deserve its living. Those words, spoken calmly and with pain, became a contained scream in millions of British homes. And when the people awoke, it was too late for Starmer to hide the shame. The following dawn, something unthinkable happened. The government, trying to react to the pressure, quietly authorized the transfer of nearly 3,000 immigrants to decommissioned military bases in northern England. The irony was deadly. The same barracks, where generations of young Britons had learned to defend their homeland, would now house those who had done nothing for the country. In Catterick and Kent, satellite images showed new fences, rows of tents, and retired soldiers weeping at the gates. The papers called it an emergency cost-saving measure. But the veterans called it profaning the sacred. The people understood. It was not a financial decision. It was an insult, and the king knew it. The tone of his words had crossed a line that not even political power dared to cross. The revolt began quietly, almost respectfully. Wreaths of red poppies started appearing at the gates of the old bases. Hand-painted signs read, "The debt has been reversed." In villages, churches, and squares, people gathered in silence, a silence that spoke louder than any protest. And then the flame spread. In Birmingham, thousands braved rain and cold, holding portraits of family members killed in wars. In Glasgow, the bells tolled 13 times, once for each decade since the end of World War II. No party organized, no union called for it. It was memory that had awoken. The British soul was breathing again. The people were no longer shouting for change. They were shouting for honor. And that demand was more dangerous for Starmer than any parliamentary opposition. And before we go on, my patriotic friend, if you too feel pride in seeing the British people awaken, leave a like now and subscribe to the channel. Here we tell what the media tries to hide, the unfiltered truth, the voice Starmer wants to silence. Your support keeps this message alive, so click the button, turn on notifications, and join us in this fight for the real Britain. In just a few days, what began as a vigil became a national movement. 12 whole cities fell into absolute silence, a silence so heavy it echoed the weight of the British conscience. The government called it an emotional reaction, trying to downplay what the people were experiencing. But what was happening was not emotion. It was memory. For the first time in decades, the United Kingdom looked in the mirror and did not like what it saw. The people were not begging for handouts. They were demanding respect. In live broadcasts, police officers were seen crying as they removed wreaths left at barracks. One veteran, trembling with cold, whispered to a camera, "We fought for freedom, and now we must fight for dignity." That video alone had over 40 million views in less than 24 hours. Then came the censorship. Downing Street's orders were clear. No broadcaster could mention the King's name or show images of the protests. The words betrayal and revolt were banned from scripts. But truth cannot be silenced by decree. Reporters began leaking secret emails, documents marked ultra-confidential, revealing that the government had drawn up a narrative control plan. But the plan failed. 2 presenters resigned live on air, saying they would rather lose their jobs than lie to the people. And when independent broadcasters started showing the real images, veterans collapsing at vigils, citizens praying silently in the streets, trust in the government collapsed for good. The United Kingdom was no longer a divided nation. Now, it was a people against its rulers. Inside the palace, tension was almost visible. Advisors urged caution, begged the king to back down. But Charles, for the first time in decades, refused to hide behind tradition. "If silence built this decay," he said, "silence will not be the remedy." The cameras showed him calm, but inside was a wounded man, a king tired of seeing his people trade honor for comfort. Behind him, portraits of past monarchs seemed to watch, stern, as if demanding courage. Meanwhile, in Downing Street, panic. Internal polls showed 78% approval for the king and only 19% confidence in the government. For the first time in generations, political power trembled before the moral force of the crown. It was the kind of confrontation no political manual knew how to resolve. And tell me something in the comments. From which part of the UK are you watching this video? Is it London, Birmingham, Manchester, or outside Britain? I want to see where every patriot who still believes this country can be saved is coming from. Comment below, because together, we are the voice they cannot silence. And then something extraordinary happened. Cathedrals across Britain lit white lights in their towers, without any order, without coordination. It was as if the whole country had decided to pray for itself. No official statement, no public speech, just faith. The king did not need to say more. His presence, his silence, were already the cry the people had waited for. In the streets, the atmosphere was both sacred and terrifying. While the government repeated the word stability until it lost all meaning, the entire country felt that something greater was happening, a kind of collective awakening, a return to what it means to be British. And when the palace lights remained on until dawn, the people understood. The king would not back down. The following days seemed taken from a film. 11 emergency meetings in just 4 days. Ministers shouting, trying to contain a crisis that had already spiraled out of control. One advisor, trembling, reportedly said, "If the king speaks again, we're finished." And no one answered, because everyone knew he was right. Outside, the people's patience turned into resistance. Drivers blocked roads, nurses held vigils outside hospitals, and veterans began sleeping at the gates of military bases in protest. It was a country in moral collapse, and this time, no political promise seemed able to mend the damage. The Labour Party itself saw its base crumble, as MPs whispered about secret motions and the fear of resignation. And when the government tried to punish the king by cutting part of the royal household's budget, the effect was devastating. The public saw the move as vengeance disguised as austerity. Social media exploded. Images of the palace with its lights on until dawn went viral worldwide. In less than a day, 90 countries broadcast the same scene. The king, motionless at the window, looking out over London, and a veteran on the other side of the Thames, raising his hand in salute. No caption was needed. That image spoke for itself. It was the symbol of a nation that, for the first time in decades, had stopped not out of fear, but out of shame. The shame of having forgotten what it meant to be British. And it was this shame that began to turn into fury. In the following mornings, the country seemed different. Thousands of letters arrived at Buckingham Palace, not with complaints, but with confessions. Ordinary people, teachers, pensioners, police officers, all apologizing for staying silent for so long. In schools, teachers began lessons with a minute's silence. At train stations, announcements paused at noon, and the only sound left was the tolling of bells. Even the London Stock Exchange delayed opening as a sign of respect. It was as if the earth itself had stopped to breathe. Economists tried to measure the impact, but the real collapse was not financial. It was moral. The people had awoken. The same people who once accepted everything now looked at the government and saw the enemy. Starmer, once confident, now avoided cameras, surrounded by security and his own guilt. And then, as night fell over the United Kingdom, screens across the country went dark at the same time. For 1 minute, there were no news bulletins, no speeches, no noise, just silence. But not a silence of mourning, a silence of judgment. The palace lit up in the distance, and at the window, the king, motionless, looking at the city that had once forgotten its heroes. On the monarchy's official profile, a single sentence appeared. Truth does not need permission to speak. 6 words that shook the system. 32 million shares later, the government had nothing left to say. The people no longer waited for promises. They waited for justice. And, for the first time in decades, it seemed justice would speak through the voice of the king himself. Because this time, silence had shouted louder than any speech.